Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I am your host, Jackson Rudolph, and this is episode 16, an interview with my dad, Eric Rudolph. I want to start today by talking about how 2020 has been wild. We've lost legendary martial artist. We lost Kobe Bryant. There's a global pandemic. Stanford graduation is canceled among many other universities. Tom Brady is a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. ESPN is broadcasting mini golf, and I learned today that a professional mini golfer makes 8 times more than I do when they win a tournament, and most professional sports are shut down. But the silver lining in all of this is that this has required us to spend more time with our families, be together, find new ways to spend our time, and hopefully find new productive ways to spend that time. But most importantly, being able to have more quality time with our families. And so that was part of the motivation today for me wanting to interview the man responsible for my existence, Eric Rudolph. And so now I have brought my dad into the podcast. And if you want to introduce yourself a little bit, Dad, go for it.
Hello, I'm Eric Rudolph. I'm mostly known as Jackson's dad, and I guess that was an interesting introduction that he gave me, so I guess we're off to a blazing start.
I mean, that's what we do here on the podcast. We try to mix it up, make it exciting, make it entertaining. So today what we're going to do is we're going to start off with some listener-submitted questions. We're going to start with a couple from Instagram and then a lot of Facebook submissions that we had directly responding to questions that our audience had for you. And then after that, we'll go into a couple of topics that I just know that you and I would like to talk about. So we're going to start right off the bat here with a question from Samuel Brume in Texas. And he says, going all the way back to the beginning of this whole ride, do you remember my first belt test? Or just any early memory of my martial arts career? But he specifies my first belt test, so take it away.
Absolutely. When you were growing up through the martial arts, you were a Taekwondo-based school, and they made a big deal out of every belt test. So your first belt test would have been when you were testing going to your yellow belt from the white belt. And like I say, it was a big deal. Grandparents, families, everyone came. You had to go through your form and your kicking combination. You had a little bit of memorization work to do, some skills challenges, and then it was a big celebration at the end, and you got your yellow belt. You got to break a board. So yeah, absolutely. It was an awesome experience. And I remember all of them.
Mm. And kind of going off of that, there's a story that I like to tell, when people are asking if I've always been good, things like that. There's a story I like to tell about how supposedly, I don't remember this, but Mom has told me this story many times about how apparently when I was a yellow belt, there was some type of meeting that happened with my instructor concerning me not being very good. First off, verify that story and then maybe give a little bit of your side of what was happening there.
No, that story is 100% true. Basically we had done this introductory class and, you loved going, but you just seemed to somewhat not really be grasping what the instructor was teaching or the whole martial arts concept.
A polite way of saying that I sucked, right?
No, you didn't. It was just like you enjoyed it, but we weren't getting the sense that this was maybe your thing. And it was time to sign a 1-year contract. And so Mom and I talked about it, and she was like, well, I'll just ask the instructor because, we don't want to get into this commitment. You were still playing baseball and, basketball and a few things at the time. And so she went in and met with the instructor, and the instructor said, no, he's doing fine. It takes people different amounts of time to pick up, some of the basics. And once he starts grasping it, he'll do fine. And so, again, you were you really enjoyed it. You were drawn to individualized sports. And so we signed up and you got better. Thank goodness.
So our next question comes from Instagram user Chris.Paul_E. I don't know if he has any relation to the Chris Paul, the basketball player. But anyway, what memories do you have of Jackson's hardest martial arts moments when he was feeling low? So maybe a low point in my career where maybe I was questioning if I'd be able to achieve what I wanted. Do you remember anything like that, and kind of talk about me getting through a point in my career like that?
Well, to be honest, you've had a great career, and certainly you've always had a very positive outlook on everything that's happened. And so there really aren't many, but the one that's probably most obvious would have occurred during the 2011 season. You had won virtually everything. I mean, I don't remember off the top of my head how many wins you had or what specific majors you won, but quite frankly, I think you won all three that year, and felt like you had made a name for yourself. And at that time, Paul Mitchell added new members, sort of in the winter right after Diamond Nationals. And so we felt like, if you were ever going to get on, this was maybe a good opportunity. And lo and behold, they made an announcement. And I think they added 3 people that year, and you didn't get included. And while you never really questioned why, I think deep down you sort of wondered, okay, am I ever going to get this opportunity? I don't know what else I could do. I've literally won everything, and it just wasn't enough. So, obviously that story turned out fine, but to me, I think that's probably the most challenging time that you went through, as a competitive martial artist.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember that, and I remember questioning that, even though I wasn't vocal about questioning it. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think that's one thing that's an important lesson for any parents or any competitors that are listening to this, is the fact that, getting on a team is the one thing that you can't control. I mean, obviously judges give you a score and you can't control what score the judges give, but you can control your performance. But when it comes to your selection on a sport karate team, it's something that's completely out of your hands. And with Paul Mitchell especially, it being the hardest team to get on statistically, there's just an added layer of difficulty there, and timing has to be right. You got to make sure that you are filling a niche that the team needs at that time. And if the timing doesn't line up, then sometimes opportunities don't work out. But like Dad, you mentioned my positive outlook. I have a firm belief that the right opportunity opens up for everybody at some point. I was just somebody that my whole sport karate career, at least, I knew that Paul Mitchell was what I wanted. So fortunately that worked out, like you said. Moving on to our next question. We go to our Facebook questions. This one is from Ernesto Lopez. And this is a good one. He was saying in reference to tournaments, but I'm going to ask more generally and in reference to tournaments, what are some of Jackson's fears?
That's a great question, because one of the things that I have always, even from when you were a young kid, been impressed with is that you have always gone into competition without nerves and without fear. I mean, you've never feared that you were going to make a mistake, or that the setting was too big, or the deck was stacked against you. In my opinion, I'm sure you've had nerves, but you've never really let them control you. You've always been able to handle that situation. And I think it's very unique, because I think about my own athletics when I was a young kid, and I can remember being nervous, and sometimes so nervous that it affected my performance. And I've never seen you experience that, which is honestly just a blessing that you have that trait. So I don't know that I have a great answer for when you have had fear.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting about that is that this is something that we've never discussed, but it's not something that I would say I was born with. Like, it's almost like, especially when I was a kid, it was a conscious decision to be that way. You know what I mean? Because another thing is, like, I was a huge sports fan growing up, as you know, like, especially with your dad, who I called Da, my grandfather. You know, we watched sports together all the time, whether it was the Jets on a Sunday or you were always rooting for the Steelers, but also, like, me and Da watching Celtics games. You never really had a favorite basketball team, did you?
The Chicago Bulls.
Oh, the Chicago Bulls. That's right, because you grew up watching Michael Jordan. That's right. So we never agreed on the same team, but we watched sports a lot together. And one thing that I loved about watching sports was I would love when somebody's competitiveness would take over a game, much like a Michael Jordan who you loved, much like a Kobe Bryant who, being a fan of the Celtics, I did not like very much. But just the ability to just step into the arena of competition and decide that it was your day, you know, to own that moment, to go take that win, whatever it was. And I think that even when I didn't have the physical abilities that I have now or have had for the last 10 years or so, that was always my mentality, even when I didn't have those abilities, was that I was just going to go out there and I was going to be me. And if I could be the best version of myself, then I was going to be okay. So it's weird in that it's not just like I just don't get nervous naturally. It's more like I taught myself. I consciously made the decision to not be nervous about it and to own that moment instead. And so it's interesting to reflect on that, because I think a lot of people don't see it in that light. I think a lot of people see it as either you have it or you don't, whereas my experience was very much that I chose how I wanted to handle it. And maybe that's some of the mental toughness and the mental control that you were referencing a little bit. But anyway. Go ahead.
I think another component of that is you have always been prepared. You always prepared yourself for whatever, whether it be competition or academics. You've just been one of those people that you've never gone in not having prepared the right way. So I think that gives you a layer of confidence that allows you to execute that mentality of, I'm not going to be fearful. I'm going to do what I know I can do.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that for sure. We're going to get more specifically into training habits and routines here in just a few questions. But first, we've got a question from Jennifer Miller. This is the mom of Alex Member. Shout out to Team Competitive Edge. Alex Miller. Shout out to that member of Team Competitive Edge. But anyway, she asks, were there times when you had to be Jackson's motivation? So did you ever have to push me? Was I ever unmotivated, anything like that? I know this answer, but I'll let you go ahead.
Absolutely not. I think this is something that I really hope people hear. If they don't listen to another thing in this podcast, to me, this is the most important thing I'm going to say tonight. And that is, I never asked you or made you go train. And I will say that you trained every day. I can remember training on Christmas afternoon. We trained at the church. Obviously, you weren't able to transport yourself there, so I had to take you. There were times when I'm sure I would have been happy had you not said that. It's time to go to train, and I got to spend the night at home, but that never happened. You were extremely self-motivated, extremely disciplined, dedicated to what you wanted to achieve, and you demanded that you have the opportunity to train every day. And when I say train, that wasn't we run over there and spend 30 minutes running through your forms. When you went to train, it was, 2 hours probably standard, and many, 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 many times 3 or 4 hours in a session. Like I say, extremely disciplined, extremely focused and goal-driven. Never once did I have to, or would I have forced you to go train. The beauty of what you've accomplished is I have been able to sit back as your dad and watch it and enjoy it. But I've never wanted to live vicariously through you or wanted you to achieve things maybe that I didn't. I've never had that personality. I've just truly enjoyed watching you pursue something that you were passionate about.
Mm. Yeah, I've heard you say that to me and try to like describe that dynamic to me of what I was like when I was a kid and when I was growing up. But it's different when I hear you try to explain it to other people, which is a perspective that I don't get a lot. And I think that was another thing that was one where that did come naturally to me. You know what I mean? It was like that. It was just what I wanted to do. It was just I understood that it was part of what it took to be successful. However, because I've been doing it for years and years and years now, it just feels like second nature to me. You were somebody that was actually sitting there watching it. So Priscilla Molina, mom of Cody Molina and Michael Molina, two NASCAR competitors, both representatives of Team Macho. She asks, so like, she asked what a typical week of training is, but I remember that we would do the same thing every day of the week regardless. So I'm going to ask a little bit more specifically, take us through one of those 2, 3, 4 hour sessions. What did my training sessions look like growing up?
Well, once you sort of established your vision of where you wanted to go, what you wanted to achieve with respect to earning that opportunity to compete on the ISKA stage, becoming a member of Paul Mitchell, all those things, you had very specific goals. They weren't like, I just want to do karate tournaments. You had specific goals. And so probably the way that I helped you was we just established some routines that encompassed the various things that you would need, the building blocks to help you be successful. So, you would do speed drills with your bow. You would do some physical fitness there, many times you would run sprints or something to get you exhausted, and then you would run a form at your most exhausted point. We would do trick drills. I don't know what rule of thumb you use these days when you're teaching kids. I think when I first started helping you come up with lesson plans, when you started teaching seminars, when you were 14 or 13 or whatever, I think we called it the rule of 8. You have to be able to hit a move 8 times out of 10 in order for it to go in your form. Well, you were never that lucky. We never had a rule of 8. Your rule was 10 of 10. And that's just how that's just how we approached it. It was a very deliberate process of trying to achieve perfection. Then we would run sections, I didn't run anything. You would run sections, and we would break virtually every form down. And when you were a little kid, you ran a lot of divisions. You even ran extreme weapons back in those days. Mm-hmm. You ran traditional forms, you ran creative forms. So it was like 7 divisions worth. And we would break all of those forms down into 3 sections, and you would run those multiple times, and then you would run whole forms, and then, we had an ending process where, you would have to run primarily CMX weapons. That's the one that sort of stuck over your entire career, where you had to hit that form at full speed at the end of training when you were the most tired 3 times back to back without an error. And if you got 2 2/3 done and you messed up, we start back over at 0. And so, looking back on it, I don't have any background in martial arts. I have no idea how we arrived at sort of this methodology that we utilized, but it really all centered on maximizing your abilities and making the forms that you run second nature and reliable and instinctual. To me, I think that's one of the things that's always stood out about your performances is that, your ability to hit very difficult routines time after time at a very high level, I think goes all the way back to when you were 8 years old and we were, doing, these crazy training sessions with this, rule of 10 and 3 to end and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I still remember all of that. I remember even going back to, like you were saying, running the sprints and stuff like that down the halls of the church, exhausting myself, and then having to go out there and run forms. One of the things that I think that a lot of people won't know that's interesting is you mentioned how the last three forms were always three of my most difficult version of the CMX bow form I was running at the time. But you also mentioned how I was doing 7 divisions. And what's interesting is I always saw myself as one day being the best weapons competitor on the planet. That is what I wanted, and I imagine that being in CMX. And I think that you might see what I'm getting at right now, Dad, so I'll let you tell a little bit. That's not always what everybody thought I would be known for. There was a time when it actually looked like I was probably going to be known as a traditionalist. So maybe some reflections on that?
Oh, there's no question that I think if you would have asked people when you were 8, 9, even 10 years old, that traditional would have probably been where they expected you to excel. You've always been a powerful striker of the bow. Even as a young kid, once Lauren, trained you on what powerful strikes were, you worked hours on being the strongest. Targeting drills, power drills, speed drills, technique drills, all those things. And quite frankly, you were coming up right when tumbling and gymnastics were becoming a major part of CMX forms and CMX weapons. Okay, we were past the butterfly kicks and the backflip and all of that stuff. We were, entering the arena of fulls and corks and all of those things. Even the young kids were doing that stuff. And I think the question sort of became, is somebody going to be able to be solid technically with their basics and create, tricks using the weapon, but not be a tumbler and be successful. And so, I think for those reasons, early on, and frankly, your first time on stage was at Diamond Nationals, and that was traditional forms. Mm-hmm. Your first division you ever won was at AKA Grands, and that was traditional weapons. CMX success came a little later for you than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to talk about because I think a lot of people don't realize that because they see me now as a CMX weapons competitor. Obviously, they still see my traditional bow form because that's a division that I still run, find a lot of success in, and enjoy running. But you don't normally see that on stage. Normally on stage, what you're seeing is the CMX bow form. But anyway, so getting back to some of Miss Molina's questions, another one was we've been talking about, all the good things about my training that helped me be successful. But she wants to know, what did you and Jackson do on training days that did not go well?
Well, I have to be honest again. There really weren't that many. You were so dedicated, and I just can't. I don't know that people really understand how much you gave up. I mean, you had such a precise focus that you were willing to skip birthday parties. You were willing to not go to sleepovers. I mean, your mom and I would be trying to get you to understand that there's this whole other world out there and that there are other things that you should, participate in. You would have none of it. You were going to train, period, the end. The only session that I can truly remember, pardon me, and I remember it vividly, was one night, and it was early in the season, so it was a relatively new form. And I want to say you were probably 11, maybe even 12. So you had sort of stepped up your game. There was some difficult moves in this form. And it was creative weapons, and that was what we were doing. That end on 3 that night, and it just wasn't happening. I mean, you would mess up on the first rep, you'd mess up on the third rep, you'd mess up on the second rep, and every time we start back at 0. And literally, this had gone on for probably 90 minutes, and I was ready to sort of say, okay, some nights you just aren't going to have it. We'll try again tomorrow. that was never going to happen. I mean, you, again, back to that consistency. You ended every training session with this concept, and you weren't leaving until it was done right. And like I said, you were a young kid. It was a school night. And you finally hit 3 forms without error somewhere around 12:15 in the morning, and went home and went to bed and got up at 6 and went to school the next day. But that's really, as far as a night that stands out, that's the only time that I really remember that was a rough night.
Mm-hmm. And I think that part of that I think that parents especially need to realize is that it's not that I was perfect. You know, I would drop in training, but what you're saying is just like my dedication and my focus and my pursuit of perfection, even when I dropped, I would just pick up my bow and do it again, and I would do it again until it was right. And because of that focus, it would be efficient, even on nights that I wasn't hitting it as often, right? But even, like, I still remember most of my training sessions, it would be uncommon for me to have more than 3 or 4 drops of the whole session. Is that accurate?
On full forms, absolutely. I mean, you would have more when we were running drills, and we usually took 30 minutes, 15 minutes maybe, and you just did creative stuff where you just did stuff with a bow and tried to be creative and create new concepts and things like that. But when we got down to running forms, you were pretty darn consistent.
Mm. And so now, kind of going back to some of the sacrifices that you mentioned, Priscilla has one more question. Did Jackson participate in extracurricular activities?
Really, the only extracurricular activity that you did, and I know you did it through part of high school. I don't remember if you did it all the way through, and that was academic team. You did academic team from the time you were in 5th grade, I guess. And I don't recall if you did it all the way to your senior year, but you did it for a number of years. An academic team had practices after school and had matches. But you played baseball for maybe one more year after you started martial arts. You probably played, basketball that one more year as well. And then basically, we would get into conflicts with, a baseball game being scheduled the same weekend as a tournament, and you would always pick the tournament. So it really wasn't fair to the baseball team, for you to not be there. And so you basically stuck with martial arts from, I don't know, probably from the time you were 8 on. Mm-hmm.
And another thing that I'm a firm believer in, and this is going off on a tangent a little bit, but I am a firm believer in that in order to be widely successful in sport karate, to win majors like U.S. Opens, Warrior Cups, Diamond Rings, to get on a team like Paul Mitchell, things like that, in order to reach that level, at some point the decision has to be made that you don't want to do any other sport, that this is the sport that you want to pursue, this is what you want to be great at. In my opinion, that was a decision that had to be made for me, and I can only imagine it's a decision that has to be made for others. So one thing that I got from several different people, several different listeners asking questions was like, what was the point that we realized that this was something that I could commit myself to long term? Because traveling sport karate has been a huge financial investment for you, I know. So what makes that okay? Talk a little bit about the opportunities that sport karate has afforded me that made it worth it to spend my time doing sport karate instead of maybe staying in basketball. And maybe if I had dedicated the same work ethic and the same hours to basketball or baseball, maybe I would have been able to get a scholarship for that and maybe even go pro in that. You know what I mean? So talk a little bit about the opportunities that was afforded by sport karate that justified that decision, and maybe the critical moments around when that decision was made, on my part, on your part, whatever perspective you feel most strongly about.
Well, first of all, I will be again upfront and say your mom was more committed that this was something that you could be successful at from a traveling the NASCA circuit model. When we first got involved in sport karate, you were doing regional tournaments, and you did a lot of them. We traveled almost every weekend. And that decision to move and focus on NASCA was a huge decision. I mean, it's very expensive to do that. But I think the reason that we made the decision to give it a chance was because of your commitment. Again, we were saying, Jackson, so and so's got a birthday party this weekend. Why don't you go to the birthday party? Why don't you go to the sleepover? And you invariably were like, well, I can't because I'm going to martial arts class Saturday morning, and then I want to be able to train Saturday afternoon and Saturday night. And, that's just the way it was. When did I start believing that, okay, he's got a chance to do something? Honestly, that probably occurred to me when I had parents of successful competitors that would come up to me and say, I don't know you, but that's your son, and he works so hard on his own that there's no doubt he's going to be successful. And, you and I have had this conversation a lot because we're around a lot of tournaments now, and you're older and you have commitments on Thursday evenings and things like that. But when I'm at a NASCA tournament these days, Thursday evening, to me, just my observation, looks like a fun night. Everybody's running around, hanging out in the lobby, going to eat, playing tag, going swimming, whatever the case may be. When you were a young kid, Thursday night, if there were mats set up, you were in the ballroom going through your stuff. If the ballroom wasn't open, you were in a hallway. I mean, you broke a chandelier at Joe Greenhall's tournament.
I remember that.
On Thursday night in the hallway. Joe, I'm sure, remembers that. He had to pay for it. And so, I saw how hard you were working, but when these people, these parents of top competitors would come up to me and sort of validate the amount of work that you were putting in. And, you grew up in the era when the seeds were whoever was the number one seed went last. Okay, so it wasn't you make the top four and you get shuffled and you get to go last a few times because of the randomness. No, whoever was the number one seed got to go last every time. And so breaking into those four seeds was a ton of work, and overcoming those top 1 and 2 seeds, you had to be special to do that. And you worked your way up that ladder. And so again, I don't know that I've really answered the question other than we just saw that this was your passion, and we were fortunate enough that we could do it. We had to be selective early on, and then as my career grew and your opportunities grew, things sort of fell into place. But sport karate has meant the world to the opportunities that you've had and to our family. I mean, probably most of my best friends or guys that I like to hang out with are all connected to martial arts and sport karate. Your resume and your accomplishments in sport karate, I firmly believe, played a large role in getting you into Stanford University. You've also been, the recipient of opportunities because of your success and hard work that have, given you the opportunity to have a signature bowl line with Century Martial Arts, to teach seminars literally all over the world, to visit places and expose different cultures and different people to martial arts and entertainment. The whole U.S. Open opportunities and a multitude of interviews and focus and features on ESPN and things like that. It's just been an amazing opportunity for you, and it's been a huge part of our family's lives as you've grown up and developed into a young man.
Yeah, I mean, those are, it's crazy because I kind of zone out just reflecting on everything and reflecting on the sacrifice and about how, like, I wouldn't change it for anything in the world because of everything that you just mentioned, all of the things that I've gained from it, from the martial arts accomplishments to getting into Stanford, to the relationships that I've made, to the experiences that I've had. So that was a very good comprehensive review of that. And that point specifically was brought up by Chrissy Boyer. She was asking, at what point did you believe this was more than a hobby? So thank you, Miss Boyer, for submitting that. We're going to switch over to, we got a couple of more Facebook questions before we get into just some discussion topics between the two of us. Jeannie Jones, mother of Benjamin, Winston, and Brandon Jones, all three martial artists, two of which competitors and competitive edge members. So shout out to the Jones family. She asks, what characteristics contributed to Jackson's success? And I think you've already touched on this a little bit, so maybe not to go too deep here, but just any additional thing about my personality that you remember when I was a kid that you think contributed?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think that you have always been a goal-oriented person, whether it's been in regard to martial arts, to academics, to being a valedictorian, to going to Stanford. You have set goals at early stages and been laser focused to get there. And you have done that with a confidence. Most people don't even know this probably because all they see is all you've ever won. But, I mean, you never won a NASCA division your first year in 9 and under black belt. Mm-hmm. Not one. And I guess what stands out to me about that is you also never came off the mat and blamed the judges or, said you were better than so-and-so or you should have won. You basically used every loss as a classroom, as a learning experience. And you took pieces of that and you went back and you continued to refine and grow and just continue to evolve and become a better competitor. You never had a negative mentality or a blame mentality. You had this relentless attitude of, I can do this, this is what I'm going to do, and nothing is going to stop me from achieving it. And so, I mean, that, in a nutshell, I believe is sort of how you developed and, frankly, how you continue to evolve. I mean, none of those things are much different than you are today.
Mm. Well, thank you. So moving on to Jeannie's next question. I like this one a lot. Did Jackson take critique from you well? Because you were the one that was always watching me train. You know what I mean? I had Lauren, who coached me privately through Skype sessions a lot when I was younger. But, once I hit 13, 14, and for every training session period, you were the one watching me and giving me that critique about when I had a stance that was wrong or when a trick didn't look right or whatever. So talk a little bit about how I took that. Yeah.
Honestly, you took it very well. Mm-hmm. Especially from the standpoint that I was a parent. I was not a martial artist. I was not an instructor. I was there to help you in the competition area only. So I guess that's where I would make an important distinction. I never tried to help you earn your next belt by verifying that, whatever form you were working on was accurate. That's never an area that I got involved in. My only area of helping you was on the sport karate side. And I think you had a trust in me and your mom that we were looking out for your best interest. And so if I said, that trick doesn't look right, or, hey, that stance is sloppy, you accepted that as truth and you fixed it and moved on. So we didn't spend much time, banging our heads together, arguing over whether I was right or wrong. It was more about the process of getting to the end goal of success.
I agree with that. I don't remember us ever really having arguments over how something looked. I think the only time that we ever had discussions was when I made up a new trick that I liked a lot and you thought that it looked stupid.
Well, sure. I mean, you would create a lot of things, and sometimes I thought they would look great. Sometimes I didn't think they would, and quite frankly, sometimes you threw them in a form and people loved them, and sometimes you threw them in a form and people didn't love them. So, we probably were pretty balanced in how most of those things worked out.
Right. So now we're going to flip-flop a little bit here because I got a lot of really good questions from both Miss Chrissy Boyer and Miss Jeannie Jones. So we're going to go back to a question from Chrissy, then back up to a question from Miss Jeannie, and then we're going to finish with actually a question they both asked. So the next question from Miss Chrissy Boyer is, has Jackson ever forgotten his belt or anything like that? But this is a little one, but I think it is significant.
Absolutely not. You have been organized and businesslike about sport karate competition from the very first time. You've always had your stuff. You've always been prepared. Frankly, you've probably always had an extra uniform and, back in the days of an iPod or whatever, probably had an extra one of those in the backpack. Organization, discipline, and business-like mentality. I mean, you've always come prepared. I can't remember you ever forgetting anything.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that question was significant to me because of her specifically singling out the belt, right? Like, my belt is something that I have revered regardless of which belt it was, whether it was my first degree black belt or my fourth degree black belt or any of them in between. I don't lose my belt. There's two things that never leave my backpack, my Bible and my belt, and I don't lose those two things. Those two things are with me 100% of the time. But anyway, we'll move on. So the next question, this one coming from Jeannie Jones, this is an interesting one. Well, and it's a difficult one. What were the defining moments as a parent, both before and after I became the quote-unquote Jackson Rudolph? So a moment before that I made it big that sticks out to you, and then after I'd had some success and became who most people know me as today, a moment post that becoming Jackson Rudolph, so to speak.
Well, the before is really easy because, as we've already discussed, you were not known necessarily for CMX. You were looked at as traditional. You had zero ability to tumble. Cartwheel was a struggle.
Accurate.
But you created this concept of linking multiple tricks into combos and doing it in a manner that flowed. So rather than it just being a trick and some strikes, you were able to create a way to encompass various types of tricks, releases, manipulations, while also moving about the mat. So it was encompassing sort of a whole new way to look at CMX weapons. And you put a new form together, and your coach had not seen it. And frankly, you had a lesson before a tournament, and you were excited, and you showed the form, and your coach frowned upon it and didn't think it was in your best interest, thought that it would probably hurt you rather than help you. And you came back and you talked to me, and you said, I just feel like that I've put a lot of work into this. I think it's unique. I think it's me, and I want to run this form. And so when you're a kid of, I don't remember the exact age, 11, 12, something like that, and you make a decision to try something on your own that maybe is a little outside the box, and obviously you were right. You immediately jumped to the top of the heap with that concept. You separated yourself from the pack. And I think that's the moment when I realized that not only were you a hard worker and talented, you had the mental toughness to know intuitively when something was right for you and when it was worth risking it to achieve your goals.
Mm.
The after, you know, this sounds terrible, but I always just look at you as my little boy, and so this whole Jackson Rudolph concept, you know, I think it's awesome that kids recognize you. I can remember standing in line at Disney and somebody, you know, asking, "Hey, are you Jackson Rudolph? I've seen you on TV." You know, those things are cool. But I guess what means the most to me as your dad is that while you've achieved this success, I've never seen you not make time for someone, and that includes adults. But more importantly to me is any little kid that wants a hug, that wants a high five, that wants an autograph, that wants to hold your bow staff, no matter what it is, you've always taken the time, even when you don't have a lot of time, quite frankly, to do those things. And so to me, that means more than what it means to be the Jackson Rudolph.
Mm. I agree with that, and that's I mean it's the reason that I do what I do. You know, if I still competed to win tournaments and this, that, and the other, then at some point I wouldn't be fulfilled anymore because I've won every tournament. You know what I mean? So it's the thing that keeps pushing me is the fact that there's kids that I inspire, and there's kids that, you know, it may change their day or their week or their life even to, you know, have that opportunity to meet me and have that interaction. And that's something that I revere. I revere the opportunity to have that type of an impact and to be able to help people in that way. And so now this is going to be the last user submitted question. This one came from both Miss Jeannie Jones and Miss Chrissy Boyer. And this one kind of plays into what you were just talking about, you know, the way that kids look at me and everything. What are your just general thoughts about my impact on sport karate, and did you see it coming? And if so, when did you see that coming? And impact can be defined however you see fit to have this discussion.
Did I see it coming? Probably not. I could see that you were developing and getting better. And then, I mean, obviously, you've been very successful. I mean, since you started winning, you have won far more than you have lost over the course of 10 years. So you have a pretty long track record of success. So obviously, as you became more recognizable, when people would, you know, whisper your name when they would see you at the hotel or whatever like that, obviously as a parent you notice that, and it makes you feel good inside. And you know, I even find myself when I see little kids at tournaments with Jackson Rudolph bow staffs or bow cases, always making sure to say something to them and trying to make them feel good. But actually, probably what the impact that I like the most, that I appreciate the most, is the stuff that nobody sees. I mean, a lot people see you give away your trophies, and that's great. And those kids always have appreciated that. I mean, I think Ben Jones, you gave him a trophy at Battle of Atlanta, like when he was a little kid. And you know, Ben has grown up and on competitive edge now, and you know, starting to make a name for himself. So obviously, being able to impact kids is tremendous. But you know, I like to pay attention when no one else is watching, and the little things that you do. You know, I can't tell you how many times you have spent your own money in order to bow staff for somebody that had a special situation, or kids have come to your ring and watched you, and you've made it a point to go by and give them a five as you left. And, it's the things that come straight from your heart that are being done just purely out of an appreciation for what you have been given and the opportunities that you've had, rather than to be something that people see you do to make people think better of you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, now that you mention it, I mean, those are things that I don't even think about. I mean, they're things that are just, it's what I do. It's what I've always done. And it's just part of me. So thank you for sharing that perspective, because that's something that I feel like I wouldn't normally come around to saying. One thing that I do want to add is, I mentioned, you brought up Ben Jones, and I've been mentioning everybody's kids as I've been bringing up the people who submitted questions. So I did not want to leave out Chrissy Boyer's kids, both Kylie and Brandon Boyer. Kylie Boyer, member of Competitive Edge, just won double overall grands at Compete Nationals. So shout out to the Boyer family as well. But anyway, so now moving on into a couple of topics that weren't audience submitted, but just a few things that I know that you and I, either you told me you wanted to discuss or that I know I wanted to discuss. The first of which, I think we got three for each of us. First one for you is, you mentioned that you wanted to share this story about me sleepwalking in Quebec. So as embarrassing as this is, I'll let you go ahead.
Oh, this is great. I mean, this is the stuff people ought to want to hear. So when we first started doing NASCA, it was just Jackson and I. And we went to every tournament. He and I had our room. He did his training routine. We had dinner. We would go to bed. And it was only years later when our whole family started traveling and all that. But in the early days, just Jackson and I. And Quebec Open, Jackson, for whatever reason, has always had a lot of success at Quebec. So on Friday at Quebec, they used to do runoffs on Friday. Jackson had won a couple of divisions. I think he had won the CMX weapons runoff. I remember this vividly. It was in the tournament hotel, and it was before they had redone the rooms. And so it was this very older, I'll call it Victorian-looking room, very small and cramped. Bed took up most of the room. We had the end table we had put all his trophies on, and I'm sure we had gone and had hot chicken for dinner, because that's what
St. Hubert's.
Yeah, at St. Hubert's, the hot chicken, shout out to them. Anyway, we had gone to bed, and I mean, it was the middle of the night, and I'm sound asleep, and all of a sudden there's a banging on the door, and I'm like, what in the world? And I get up, and I didn't even notice that Jackson's not in bed, and I look out through the peephole, and Jackson is standing out there in just his underwear, and literally he was sleepwalking. He got out of bed and went out in the hallway, and I don't know what he was doing, but at some point, I guess he came to his senses and figured he needed to get back into the room. And but yeah, Jackson has sleepwalked at least 3 times in his life that I can remember. But locking himself in the hallway in his underwear at Quebec was by far the best story.
Which was also my first time in a foreign country, I think. I think that was my first Quebec.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. So anyway, you guys are welcome for that one to all the listeners. Next one that you wanted to bring up ends up in another embarrassing moment for me. My very first NASCA tournament, the Bluegrass Nationals. And specifically, you wanted to talk about a music box, which was you guys' fault, you guys being my mom and dad. And also a kid by the name of Rogelio Gonzalez, which is 100% my fault what happens with that story. So I'll let you go ahead.
Okay, so our first NASCA tournament was Bluegrass Nationals, which used to be held in Louisville, Kentucky, only about 3 hours from our house. So we'd done a lot of RSKC regional tournaments. And, Jackson he'd held his own. I mean, he was by no means a star, but he had won a little bit and enjoyed competing. And so we had heard that NASCA was the biggest and best. And so easy trip to go to Louisville. So we did. And we were told, okay, there's musical divisions and you've got to bring your own music box. So we're like, okay, well, that's no problem. We literally go to Walmart and I remember it. It was blue with yellow buttons.
Yeah, blue with yellow speaker. Yep.
Yep. Yellow speaker, yellow buttons, and it was a CD player, and it was about the size of an old lunchbox. Okay? So we're saying, hey, we got music. Not a problem. We thought we were set. And as we were approaching, and guys, this was back in the day Bluegrass Nationals, it was packed.
Mm-hmm. 2005, right?
I don't remember the year. The Galt House, oh my gosh. I mean, you could barely get through the hallways. And so on Friday afternoon, we're heading toward the tournament, and we have this guy come by with a cart. And on this cart are these massive speakers and this professional sound system and everything. And so we're thinking, wow, that guy must be the DJ. He's probably running late. And then we pass some people, and they're rolling these huge speakers.
The Carvins. Everybody had a Carvin.
Carvin, yeah, these huge Carvin speakers. And I'm thinking, wow, these people are bringing some serious music boxes. So we literally get to the ring, and Jackson is an advanced belt, and there's probably on Friday night in that first creative weapons division, probably 25 kids.
Mm-hmm.
And, 18 of them know what they're doing, and they have these massive music systems. Well, I'm here to tell you that our CD player, you couldn't hear it if you put it up to your ear, much less in that room. So we literally were, and we had nothing to do with it. It wouldn't fit in a bag or anything. So we're literally holding this thing. And some kid's parents, one of the better competitors, he could tell that you were brand new. We were green as could be. His mom came over and allowed us to use their speaker. But yeah, we were completely unprepared. And you told this story on your podcast earlier, and I'm going to correct you. You actually didn't finish last. There were 20-something people, and you finished as a finalist. You were either 7th or 8th in that first division that you ever ran. Nowhere near winning, but you held your own for someone that had never competed in that environment. And again, to your credit, what I appreciated the most is when we left that weekend, you never had a negative word about the experience. You never had a negative word about literally getting your butt kicked in some of these divisions. You said, wow, I learned a lot. I know where I got to get better.
Mm.
And that was
to add something real quick. The story that I tell about my first NASCAR tournament getting dead last, I'll correct myself if I didn't say this when I told that story. That's my first NASCAR tournament as a black belt, because I do remember that. My first NASCAR tournament as a black belt, it was a division with maybe 10 kids and Dre Rice. And Dre Rice beat everybody, and I was, if not dead last, I was pretty darn close to it.
Well, now the other part about his first NASCAR tournament and about Rogelio Gonzalez is Jackson used to spar. Okay, when we first got into sport karate, he did forms, weapons, and fighting. And any of you all that know Jackson knows that he is a very logical thinker. He's very intelligent, but he processes everything. That's great when you're doing algebra. That really is a bad quality when you're doing point fighting. Because while that brain's working, someone is punching you in the face. Well, Jackson has always been tall. God, I wish I would have been that tall. He didn't get that from me, but regardless, he's always been tall. Rogelio Gonzalez, probably a foot shorter than Jackson, at least, okay? So Jackson is in the sparring division. And there's only, I guess, 3 kids in it. Jackson draws a bye. Rogelio fights somebody else. So Jackson is in the finals against Rogelio. Rogelio, while he does forms and weapons, he is a good fighter. And so this division starts, and I promise you, Rogelio Gonzalez kicks Jackson in the head 3 times quicker than you have ever seen. Jackson loses 7-0 in like 20-something seconds. I mean, it was like over. And the hilarious thing was, he gets this mammoth trophy for second place. Absolutely got his butt kicked. But he was very proud of that second place trophy that he got for getting his butt kicked.
Well, it was one of the Bluegrass second place trophies that had the clock on it. That's my only Bluegrass trophy with the clock.
Yeah. And you did nothing but get your head kicked in to earn that.
Yeah. I think the last one was a spin hook kick too, which was just nasty.
It was. And Rogelio was a great kid. I hear from his instructor that I think he is maybe starting medical school this year as well. So he's a neat kid. He didn't compete all that long, maybe another year or two, but he taught you a lesson in your first NASCAR sparring match, that's for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. Tons of respect to Rogelio, but I still remember getting kicked in the head all those times. Anyway, last one that I know that you wanted to cover is the Chris Angel, which for the listeners that don't know, Chris Angel is the name of probably my most famous of my signature moves, which is where I throw the bow from behind my back and then catch it what was initially on the back of my hand without the bow moving, then graduated on to just the back of my finger by U.S. Open of the year that I debuted it. So, Dad, just kind of your side of me preparing that move for competition and then what debuting that move was like, both the original at AKA Warrior Cup and then the upgrade to one finger at the U.S. Open later that same season.
Well, I mean, the truth be told, you had been throwing that bow up and catching it on the back of your hand or trying to for a really long time. I mean, that's something you had played with and probably gotten pretty reliable at literally for probably 2 years before we ever considered putting it in a form. And, you had reached a level in your career where there was an expectation that you have something new. I mean, that's one of the downsides of having a lot of success is the expectations are that you've got to keep bringing it and you've got to keep, thinking outside of the box and creating new stuff. And we had been working on your new form. I mean, this was literally, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was within a week of AKA when we added this to that form.
Yeah, and, it was.
The body of the form was there, and we've been playing with ending moves, and we just nothing felt right, and we wanted something different. And one night you were literally in one of those sessions where you were just brainstorming, and you really weren't doing it to put it in the form, but you threw it up and you caught it on the back of your hand, and you sort of you were walking. I remember plain as day, you were walking, and while you were walking, you just carried the bow on the back of your hand. And I think we both sort of had that aha moment and looked at each other and said, oh, wow, is there a way to do that? And, you played with it for literally just a couple of minutes after you and I had sort of said, oh, wow, this could be something. And you came up with a way to, to sort of go into that little squat move that you did, that front stance, and bring it across. And so, yeah, you were prepared to throw it at AKA. And the intent was to throw it if you made the Warrior Cup round. And we get to AKA, and I don't remember if musical weapons or creative weapons went first. I want to say musical weapons went first. And you didn't do extreme anymore by this time. Mm-hmm. You made a mistake in musical weapons. And so you didn't win. So you had one shot left to make runoffs. And I'll never forget it. Joe Greenhall was the center judge. And you run your form and you're doing your thing. And all of a sudden, you throw the Chris Angel because you felt like, I have to win this division. I have to lock it up. And you threw that bow up and caught it on the back of your fingers and came across. And literally, it was almost this weird silence. I mean, I think everyone was completely caught off guard by that move. And as I recall, you got at least 110 on that form. You went on to win the Warrior Cup that night, or on Saturday night with the Chris Angel. And then, some of the questions earlier is, how do you know your kid has made it and everything? I mean, literally by Saturday afternoon, every kid in the corner of that room was throwing the bow up, trying to catch it on the back of their hand. It was pretty neat to see how quickly people started trying to do that move. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, there's been a ton of people that have replicated it in various ways, but you have a unique way of catching it and positioning it, and the way it rides across the back of your hand is very unique. So I've never seen anyone actually replicate it truly the way that you execute the move. So that's the history of the Criss Angel.
Mm. And I often talk about it because it's probably the single like greatest instantaneous feeling in my career is that like weird surreal silence that you talk about. And there's only 2 times that I've ever felt it, and it was that throughout that weekend, every time that I did the Criss Angel that Warrior Cup weekend, that was the reaction without fail. That because nobody could figure it out at that time. But the only other time that I felt it was about 6 months later at US Open, when I upgraded it to be just catching it with one finger before people had really figured out how I was doing it on the back of my hand. So maybe your side of the decision to make that upgrade at US Open and then it happening?
Well, I mean, obviously the Criss Angel was very popular, but when you get down to the U.S. Open, and the U.S. Open field is hand selected, so you can't eliminate competitors as you can in runoffs and things like that. So the U.S. Open, you've got 4 of the best competitors in the world, and you had been playing with all kinds of variations. You'd been playing with catching it on your pinky. You'd been playing catching it on your point finger. Taking the Criss Angel into a palm span. You'd done all kinds of things with it, and you've had a pretty solid track record on the U.S. Open stage, and basically the one finger was a lot of risk. Okay, I don't think you do it so casually now that I don't think people truly understand how hard it is to catch a bow staff on one finger.
Still, not with it spinning.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my point is, it's still to this day extremely difficult to do because you've got to catch it in the right place, or the weight balance isn't right and it's out of control. So the willingness and the confidence you had to pull that move on live TV is still one of the craziest things. When I think about forms you've ran, that's a pretty cool moment.
Mm-hmm. So that's a good segue into the topics that I want to cover, which I actually do not know the answer to this question. And maybe you've just answered it with that form, but maybe not. What is your favorite form you've ever watched me do? Because I have no idea.
Okay, well.
Wait. I wanted, if the listeners heard that, I just heard paper move. Have you written notes about all this?
Absolutely.
I love it. I love the preparation. Anyway, your favorite form of mine ever is, go ahead.
Oh, wait a minute. No, I can't do it. Just my favorite form is.
Oh, okay.
I have a favorite traditional form. I have a favorite traditional weapons form. And I have a series of favorite CMX weapons forms. So let's start with the easiest one first. My favorite traditional form that you ever ran was your first time making stage at the Diamond Nationals. You made stage running traditional form. That was back in the days when you used blended forms, and you ran a great form. There's some beautiful pictures of you in some perfect stances. I remember the prayer stance. I got that picture in my office to this day. But probably the most important thing to me was that my dad was there. My dad was passionate about you. He had already had strokes, obviously, and was somewhat incapacitated, but he was able to come to Diamond Nationals, and he was there the first time that you were performing on stage. And one of my favorite pictures on this earth is you sitting in his lap holding your runoff trophy for that division. So I don't care if you were to somehow decide you wanted to be in the Olympics, it would never eclipse that moment as far as traditional forms go with me. Traditional weapons. This one may surprise you. My favorite traditional weapon.
Wait, can I try to guess first?
Sure, you can try.
My guess is the DC traditional weapons form in the overall because I either dropped or got beat in the runoff and then used my All I Do Is Win walkout music to set up my traditional weapons form, ran my traditional weapons form without music after using music in the walk-in, won the overall. That's my guess.
Well, you suck because that's good.
Go ahead then.
Well, no, that was just that season. That's the season where you were winning. I mean, you were winning 3 divisional grands and 1 or 2 overalls at every tournament.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you won virtually everything all year. We got to Cap Classics. As I recall, you ran a good form in runoffs. You just happened to get beat by the panel that day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even remember who beat you. It doesn't really matter. And so everyone was so accustomed to your form, to All I Do Is Win, being on stage, and it wasn't going to be that night. That was back in the day where CMX went against traditional. And so when you came out in your traditional gi and raised your hand and your normal music started playing, I think there were people that thought you were just going to run your CMX form. Because why else? I mean, nobody's ever played walk-in music for traditional weapons.
Mm-hmm.
But we actually, again, credit to your mom. She was great back in the day of cutting music on the laptop. We cut All I Do Is Win to cut off as soon as you did your intro. And you did. You were a powerful kid. You've always had powerful strikes. And you killed that traditional weapons form. And you actually won that overall pretty handily. I don't even think it was very close. And that was just a really neat moment because by that time you were sort of seen as this CMX competitor.
Mm-hmm.
And come out there and win that overall running traditional after doing that epic walkthrough. That was just a really cool moment.
So that was your favorite. You said that I sucked because I guessed it?
Yes.
See, when you said that I suck, I thought that you meant that I was just way off. But no, I'm glad that I guessed it because that's one of my favorites too. But anyway.
The fact that you guessed it is what it is. All right, now,
so do the CMX ones.
CMX weapons is going to surprise you. I don't think you could have guessed this one, but we won't waste time doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have 3, and in 2 of the 3 you did not win. To be quite frank.
Oh, I probably could tell you those 2 then.
So one of my favorite forms is, and this is all credit to Sammy Suddeth. She was no longer running this music. You ran a CMX form at the Battle of Atlanta to Devil Went Down to Georgia, and you were absolutely on fire. I mean, you were flying. Your tricks were on point. Crowd was losing their mind. And you actually dropped on your very last closing move, actually, and DQ'd, but still, great form. Again, as your dad and the person that watched you train all those times, I focus more on whether you achieved the level that you set out to achieve, more so than whether you won or what judges scored you or whatever. It's more about, did he do what he wanted to do? Did he accomplish his goal in that form? And you truly had in that form until the very end when you dropped. And, that was sad, but regardless, that was a killer form.
Mm-hmm.
The other form that I always go back to is Twin Towers. The first time you broke a bow during CMX competition, it was in the finals, going for an overall. This was back in the day before anybody was doing double bow, etc. You broke it in half and effectively ran the second half of the form, basically as a scream of sticks. And it really became an issue because some judges wanted to score you because it was so cool what you did. And, obviously you knew, I knew, we all knew you were DQ'd. We had in no way did we think you deserved to be scored. And ultimately they got that sorted out and you didn't win, and that was fine. But I just thought it was awesome because, A, you broke a bow in a CMX competition, which has happened a number of times since then, obviously. It happened last year at Diamonds, for example. Mm-hmm. But it hadn't happened very often that I was aware of up until that point. And so it was just a really cool moment. Now, as far as finishing a form that you actually won, I'm going to tell you about a form that meant virtually nothing, but it speaks to why you do what you do. And I don't remember if you were 15 or 16. It was at Diamond Nationals. It was the last division of the night. And I want to say there were there was at least 12 competitors in this ring. And we were already to the random draw deal. And for what fortunate you drew last. And 11 competitors in a row dropped in front of you. Parents, I kid you not, everyone in the division dropped. 11 people. Jackson, all he had to do was go out there and do 3 strikes and bow and take the trophy and go to runoffs. No questions asked. And I remember as well that the panel was not necessarily the best panel in the world for you. It was a tough panel. You would have had to really earn your stripes, and you could have easily just walked out there, done not even your first section. You could have just made up some strikes and called it a day. And you ran your entire stage form at full speed with all upgrades just because you wanted to. And you nailed that form, and I will tell you that every judge that was there that night thanked you, and that meant a lot to me because you didn't take the easy way out. You came to compete, and regardless of what your competitors did around you, you did what you came to do. And to me, that was just a cool moment.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that. I've had a couple of forms like that. Maybe that Diamonds was the first time that it happened, and maybe it was more significant because it was Diamonds. I mean, I remember I did it last year in the Quebec finals. You know, it was me and 2 other guys, and they both dropped, and I still ran my full form for the crowd. And there's 2 reasons that I do that. Number one is, especially in a stage situation, I'm doing it for the crowd because, you know, they didn't come to the night show to watch me do a strike set and take an overall grand. They came to watch my form. They want to see me do my full form. And so that's one of the reasons that I've always done it. But in those moments that, like you described, that are more insignificant, 2 things. I saw it as a challenge. Like I wanted to be able to say that I could still hit my whole form given those circumstances because, and any competitor knows this, there is a compounding effect that happens when 3 or 4 competitors in a row drop and you watch that happen, and then you got to go run your form, and there's this little extra pressure not to continue that chain and ultimately wind up in a winless division, because that's what happens. In grands, they have to give you a score because that's how the rules work, but in divisions, they don't have to score you, so there would just be no winner if everybody dropped. So part of it to me is the challenge of trying to do that. And then the competitor in me sees that as proving a bit of a point, but I won't get in too much into my competitive mentality because that can get a little dark. Anyway, now topics that I wanted, that was the first topic that I wanted to cover. Two more little things. This one, when we talked about this before I started recording, you said that this one was easy, and that shocked me because I have no idea what the answer to this question is either. Your favorite non-Jackson Rudolph, anybody else, your favorite competitor, or if it's an individual performance, if that's easier to pick out, that you just loved or were impressed by or had respect for, whatever. Not related to me, somebody else who impressed you and why.
Well, I don't have a favorite competitor other than you because I respect a lot of people that have competed and done amazing things. But I have one that definitely sticks out, and I actually thought of a second one that I'm going to mention. And the one that sticks out to me is actually, I think it's also a time that you recall and speak of often, and that is Kalman Choka's last form at Diamonds. But what I'm going to focus on is Matt Emig. And obviously Matt, one of the greatest sport martial arts competitors there's ever been. Matt was having a phenomenal season, winning forms virtually every time. Kalman was winning weapons a lot. But Matt actually, and someone would have to verify this, but I'm pretty sure that Matt actually drew the last position to go that night.
Matt did have to go after Kalman's retirement form. I remember that.
But I think Matt actually traded draws with someone else so that he could go right beside Kalman. In other words, Kalman ended up with a draw. I think there were 4 competitors, and maybe Kalman was second.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt didn't want to go last. He wanted to go right beside Kalman. So he traded with someone. I don't remember if he went right before or right after. But Kalman and Matt went back to back. Matt hit probably, in my opinion, one of the best chuck forms of his career. Kalman came behind, did the blindfolded form, got mostly 10s or all 10s or whatever it was. But that was an epic competition. It was a very great thing that Matt did by wanting to make sure that him and Kalman were side by side. In other words, Matt didn't want to go very last with a break in between and not have that direct comparison. I mean, I think he mentally made the decision that, hey, I want me and Kalman side by side. They were teammates. They were staunch competitors. They both wanted the same thing, but it just made for a unique moment. And so that stands out to me. The other one that stands out to me, you were a little bitty kid. It literally may have been the night show when you told me you wanted to make the ISCA stage and you were going to be on Paul Mitchell, and I patted your little head and said, yeah, I'm sure.
That's the next question, so don't give away too much about that yet.
Okay, but anyway, and that night, Josh Corton, with his creative sword, went against Corey Lutkus' creative bow.
Oh, I used to love those divisions.
That was a flippin' awesome head-to-head competition. If I'm not mistaken, Josh Corton won the night that I'm talking about. He won the ISKA, but those 2 guys were killing it in that division.
And then the very next tournament was because I think it was actually a few years after that U.S. Open that we're about to talk about. Because I remember the very next tournament was the first time that you and I ever flew to a tournament, which was U.S. Capitol Classics in D.C., and I remember I got to watch that same division up close because it was Josh Corton and Corey Lutkus in the runoffs, and I was stage side watching that runoff. And to me, that was the type of battle, the battle that you're talking about with Josh Corton and Corey Lutkus. Same thing that you were talking about with Matt and Kalman. That is what that's what I longed for as a competitor. Like, I wanted that. I wanted to get at that level and have somebody else at that level so that I could go at it like they did. And I'm proud to say that I've done that with a number of competitors in my career that have been really great competitors that I've competed alongside and been blessed enough to have the opportunity to compete against them. So now you already referenced it a little bit, but my last question is my absolute favorite story to tell because it's a testament to my confidence, my drive, what drives me, and my loyalty to Paul Mitchell is that very first U.S. Open I ever attended when I sat in the back row of the night show with you. I watched that U.S. Open, watched Paul Mitchell competitors win all night, and I looked up at you and I said, one day, I'm going to be on that stage, I'm going to be on that team, and I'm going to win. And I always tell about how you looked at me and you chuckled and you said something to the effect of, we'll see, or maybe someday. No one has ever heard your side of that story. Go ahead.
No, that's absolutely true. I remember. I had you were a little kid, and you and I were close. And, like I said, you eventually, developed friendships and hung out a little bit, but in those first few years, you were so focused on just doing your thing and training that you and I just hung out. So it was you and I sitting toward the back at the ISCA night show. I had my arm around the top of your chair. You looked up and said that to me. I remember you had that spiky hair, and I remember patting your head. Or you may not have had the spiky hair at that time. I can't remember. I remember patting your head and saying, well, son, that's a great goal. And all the while, in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, you're a long way from that goes. We'll just have to see how this goes.
Did you or did you not chuckle? Because I remember a chuckle.
Oh, I'm sure I chuckled. I mean, I was probably trying to be the good dad and be confident, but I'm sure I chuckled because, again, we were talking about a long runway between you and that goal at that time.
And it was only 4 years till the first U.S. Open, 6 years till I won it for Paul Mitchell. But
Well, that's true. I mean, it did happen very fast, but at that moment, sitting in that environment and seeing the display of talent on that stage, um, I wanted that for you. And while I didn't mention your first ISKA as being one of my favorite forms, it's certainly one of my favorite moments. Ironically, my two favorite sport karate moments come from that initial conversation that you had. You winning your first ISKA, because I know that was your goal and your dream. Definitely is that moment. And then that morning at the U.S. Open on July the 13th, 2012, when you got that call to be on Paul Mitchell. I mean, those two moments, they resonate. I'll never forget them as long as I live. I still have the picture of that Paul Mitchell gi laying on a chair at the U.S. Open on my phone today from that morning.
And I remember it vividly as well. And we're getting close to our time limit here on the podcast. I know this has been a long-winded one, but that's kind of what I anticipated. For our listeners, I told my dad it'd only be 45 minutes, but here we are almost 90 into it. But anyway, thank you very much, Dad, for taking the time.
I have to answer the question. I get asked this question at every single time. So I'm going to answer it globally, okay? And that is, do I still get nervous watching you compete? And the answer is 100% yes, every time, every form. I don't know why, but I do. And
well, you had your heart rate monitor go off on your Apple Watch once when you were watching me, right?
That's true. Now I'm sort of involved with some of these tournaments and helping. It was at Diamonds, not this last year, but the year before. During your form, my Apple Watch started going off because my heart rate got too high, which is kind of funny. But I'm very proud of the fact that I have always watched your forms. Some parents, including your mom, they can't watch. And I've always looked at it differently. I've always sort of cherished getting to watch you do what you love. I guess it comes from watching you train all those hours as a little bitty kid. And this is the fulfillment of that journey. So I cherish watching you compete, but I absolutely still get nervous every single time.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because I'm sure there's other parents that can resonate with that. And thank you for spending your time, and thank you for everything that you sacrificed for me for all those years to help make me the competitor that I became and the man that I became. So thank you for that. And move your finger. You're making an echo. You were covering up your microphone and making an echo there. But thank you for that, and I love you. So thank you.
Love you, Bubs. Have a good night.
Good night, Dad. All right, so now that we finished that up, just a couple of other things as we wrap up here. Number one, due to the coronavirus causing a lot of schools to be closed right now, to help get some additional content to those schools, the Flow System is offering 30 free days if you go on to the flowsystem.tv and look for the Flow System Weapons Bundle. That's our monthly subscription to the Bow Staff and Kama programs at the same time, and you enter the promo code FLOWSHOW, FLOWSHOW. Enter that promo code at checkout. You'll be able to get 30 days of that subscription for free. That includes a full level of beginner, intermediate, and advanced content to help out and give the school owners and instructors more content, more online content to be helping their schools at this time. And I've also got some online teaching tips for school owners and instructors that was posted on the Century Martial Arts Facebook page in a live stream earlier today. So you can scroll through Century's Facebook page or scroll through my personal page, because I shared it there to get that information. And please let me know if you have any questions. I hope that especially the parents enjoyed taking a listen to this interview with my dad. I think that everybody should cherish this time to be able to spend together with their families while everybody's in quarantine. And as always, thank you all so much for tuning in and supporting the podcast. If you have any questions about my dad and I's discussion here tonight, feel free to leave them down in the comments. Thank you for your support. Everybody stay safe, stay positive during this time. This is Jackson Rudolph signing off of the Jackson Rudolph Podcast. See you next time.